Welcome on back, everyone. Today we have got a featured build brought to us by Dragoo. He is bringing us his legendary Warden build that he's been running this patch. And he's got two variants of the spec to share with us here. A dual wield Sword and Board and a Sword and Board 2H version. And this build has got it all. It's got amazing damage, amazing sustain, tons of hit points and healing power, and all the AoE burst that you could ever want on a Stamina Warden. And of course, be sure to check out Dragoo's YouTube channel and his Twitch, a link in the description down below for you guys. He's an amazing ESO content creator. He's been doing it for a long time as well. A lot of you guys may recognize him as a regular on the Top 5 Battles series. And it is always a pleasure to share a build from Dragoo. He, of course, has provided us with some amazing footage of the build in action, so be sure to check that out in the last half of the episode. And without further ado, let's get into that build, guys. So to start off, Dragoo has picked a Wood Elf for this build. Wood Elf being an amazing all-around choice for stamina builds, especially medium armor, offering that speed, penetration, regen, max stam. Nord is also a really good option for this build, adding a little bit more bulk all around. This build can get away without having that extra sustain that Wood Elf provides, so you can actually use the stamina race of your choice, but those are Dragoo's top picks. Now, taking a look at the buffed up stats on this build, we got the 10k Magicka, 34k hit points, and 28.8k stamina on the back bar, and 27.7k stamina on the front bar. Dragoo has gone for a great balance in stat here, especially for a Stamina Warden. A lot of stamina to work with, don't need a ton of Magicka, and that health pool is going to be amazing for the hit point scaling heals that Stamina Warden has access to. Pair that with the powerful stamina heals on this build, and just the fact that having 34k hit points is going to be a lot of damage to chew through. It gives you a good amount of defense on a build that is very offensively minded. Now, when we drink our potion and take a look at our buff recoveries on the spec, you can see we've got a whopping 3,100 stamina recovery on the back bar on this build. Dragoo packing a ton of sustain on this bad boy, 1,000 health recovery as well. And then the torque with the Magicka recovery on top is coming in at just shy of 1,200. Magicka sustain not being a huge deal for this build, definitely a good value to have, I think. Now, taking a look at the weapon damage and the weapon critical values on this spec, when we buff up and switch to the front bar here, you can see that the weapon damage is coming in at 3,600 at 48.6% weapon crit. Now, weapon critical has taken a bit of a nerf this patch, so it's a little bit lower than it was in the previous patch. That being said, this build does have access to minor savagery. It does also have access to minor brutality as well. And then finally, with Balorgh on top, this build can push over 6.6k weapon damage. Now, the two-hand variant of this spec can actually hit just shy of 8k weapon damage, and we'll show you guys in the gear why that one gets a little bit higher than this version. Now, moving on to the resists and the crit resist on the spec, fully buffed up 2,300 physical spell resist on the back bar with 2,648 critical resistance. Not insanely high. This is a medium armor build, so this is pretty bare bones for medium armor, but the bulk of this build mainly comes from having that high health pool and powerful heals to keep it there. Now, the Mundus stone for the build is the Shadow Mundus. If you're using the dual wield version, the Shadow Mundus is better because it will increase your damage and healing, and we have the higher critical rate. If you go for the two-hand version of this build, your crit rate drops quite a bit, simply because we drop the precise dagger, so going for the Warrior Mundus is better in Dragoo's opinion here. Now, Dragoo is also a werewolf on this build, and I think that's primarily because the ultimate will provide a little bit of passive stamina recovery when it's slotted on the back bar. That being said, you do have the option to go for that big wolf ultimate on this spec if you want to as well. And then finally, we've got the Artaeum Takeaway Broth as the food of choice, giving max health, health recovery, max stam, and stamina recovery. You can always go for the dubious Cameron Throne if you want a cheaper alternative, but health recovery is a great stat to have if you can in PvP. And then for the potion, Dragoo has gone with the Essence of Immovability. This guy is a great pairing, especially with the Clever Alchemist set. You're going to use this potion before you enter combat, or even when you need it in combat, get that big Clever Alchemist buff, immunity to knockback and disabling effects, the major savagery buff, which you need as well, and of course that stamina recovery. And finally, let's move on to the gear that he's running on this spec. The first set that Dragoo has is Balorgh, which is one of the best damage sets all around for PvP. It adds a ton of weapon damage and penetration when you use your ultimate, and the one piece being weapon damage as well is also great. And of course, the great thing about Balorg is that as you continue to stack your ultimate, the damage bonus will increase up to the maximum of 500 ultimate. Now, moving on to the next set, we have got Clever Alchemist. Clever Alchemist is the backbar set for this build, and it is here to provide a little bit of max health, actually an important stat for this build, and then of course that huge weapon spell damage buff when you go for your potion on the back bar. Now, you do have to be conscientious that you use your potion while you're on your back bar to ensure that you get this buff, but as long as you do that, you will have it up about half the time during the fight, and 675 weapon damage is a huge amount of damage to have. Now, moving on to the next set, Dragoo has got the Briarheart set on his front bar. Briarheart's going to offer weapon crit, max stam, and then finally, when you deal critical damage, you'll increase your weapon damage by 450 for 10 seconds, and your critical strikes will heal you for 366 health. This is on a 15-second cooldown. So this set will have a pretty good uptime. You'll be landing a lot of crits with that 55% or so crit rate on the front bar, so you'll get a lot of usage out of this set. And then for the next set, Dragoo has gone with the Torque of Tonal Constancy. The Torque is just a fantastic sustain item, one of the best in the game. When you're below 50% of one resource, it'll give you 450 recovery in the other, and you can of course have both of these buffs up at the same time. This is namely really nice for this build because we can use a Magicka dump by using our Magicka heals and the armor buff to quickly get access to quite a bit of stamina recovery. And it works vice versa as well. If we're low on stamina, we can pound a whole bunch of the Magicka heals that this build has too. Now, the next set that we have, and the final set, is the Ring of the Trainee. It offers a little bit more health than a traditional two-piece set would, and of course, it's the one-piece item, which makes this a fantastic kind of filler slot if you have an extra slot in your build. Now, taking a look at the traits on this build, starting off on the back bar, Dragoo's got a Nirnhoned hammer and a sturdy shield. Sturdy being a great option for the shield, just reduce the cost of block even further. With the maximum stamina enchant, mixing that in with the Nirnhoned mace, that is there, I think, of course, for that bonus to the healing power. You could, of course, go for a powered weapon here if you want for the additional healing, or you could even go for an infused weapon to buff the weapon spell damage enchant that is on here as well. Now, on the front bar, Dragoo has gone with a Nirnhoned mace and a precise dagger. The mace for that penetration, and the dagger, of course, for that additional critical rate. And then for the poison, Dragoo has gone with the brutality draining poison that does everything. It will reduce their weapon damage and give us the minor weapon damage buff. It will reduce their critical damage and give us the minor critical chance buff. And then finally, it will drain stamina from the target, increasing the cost of their abilities and restore some stam back as well. These poisons don't last for a super long time, but the amount of additional offensive pressure you get when it does proc is definitely going to be great. Now, for the jewelry, Dragoo has gone with a mix of Infused and Bloodthirsty, with all weapon damage and chance, just pushing that damage as high as he can on this build. Now, the choice between how much Infused and Bloodthirsty you want to run is kind of up to the user. Dragoo recommended at least one Infused, and then the other two are up to you. And then for the gear, Dragoo has gone with full Divines and the maximum stamina enchant. We got the Shadow Mundus on here, so Divines will push that even further for our damage and healing. And then finally, Max Stam just to increase the damage and healing further too. And finally, if you want to do the two-hand version of this build, swap out the Briarheart set for a two-handed New Moon Acolyte Maul, and of course the other gear as well. Something to note is that there's a few changes trait-wise if you do this setup. The two-hand Maul will be Nirnhoned with the weapon spell damage enchant, and then you're actually going to move the brutality draining poison back onto the back bar and leave this bad boy Nirnhoned or powered. And then for the gear, simply because you're going to be running the Warrior Mundus instead of the Shadow and you have the reduced crit rate, Dragoo has recommended that you go for a mix of well-fitted and impenetrable. You can even put Infused on your big pieces to buff your max stam even further as well. And of course, both variations of this build are going to be 5 medium and 2 heavy. Now, let's take a look at the skills we're rocking on this bad boy. The first ability is, of course, Subterranean Assault. There's been some changes to how this ability works in this patch. It's still going to be the 3-second delayed attack, but after you use it once, it will now just reset and be activated twice. It no longer will debuff your opponent's armor, so that's a big change to this ability, and a big change to just the Stamina Warden in general. That being said, it's still a very powerful delayed burst skill, and a huge AoE smack when paired with the other skills that this build has to offer. Now, the next skill that Dragoo has is Cutting Dive, and this is going to be the primary kind of spammable for the build. It also throws on a bit of a dot, and it can set the opponent off balance if they are further than 7 meters away. The bleed on the Cliff Racer can also stack, making it an even better spammable if you use it long term. Now the next ability that we have here is Arctic Blast, and this is the primary Magicka dump for this build. A very powerful hit point based heal. When we buff our hit points up, you can see it has a 9.2k health tooltip, and then an additional 1k health every 1 second over 5 seconds. That is a very strong heal, and then of course while the frost persists, it deals a little bit of frost damage to nearby enemies, having the chance to chill them, and of course if they're hit 3 times, it will stun them as well. A fantastic all-around defensive ability, and that's the reason why Dragoo has invested in hit points for this build. Now the next skill that he's got here is Bird of Prey. This is access to Major Expedition for the build, also access to Minor Berserk on the front bar for slotting it here as well. And then finally, Dragoo has got Whirling Blades as his finisher move for the build. A 7k tooltip on it, increasing by up to 100% more damage if your opponent is below 50% health. For the ultimate on the front bar, Dragoo's gone with Dawnbreaker of Smiting. This will deal huge AoE damage to everybody that it hits, put a nasty dot on them as well, and on top of it, this ultimate pairs really well with the delayed burst mechanic that Warden has with Subterranean Assault, and then of course following it into the Whirling Blades being an undodgeable AoE. Really great combination damage on this build to everybody around you. Now moving on to the back bar, the first ability we've got is Soothing Spores. This is the primary burst heal for the build, and it's 15% more powerful on an ally that is within 8 meters of you. Now the next ability he's got is Shuffle. This is going to be access, of course, to that major evasion buff, and it's going to remove snares and immobilizations for 5 seconds because we've got 5 pieces of medium armor on this spec. The next ability here is Resolving Vigor, another primary heal for the build. Not a burst heal, but instead a heal over time. This is the one you will likely use the most on this spec, as it is the most powerful stamina-based heal that you have access to. And then the next ability is the Bull Netch, which is going to be a great source of stamina recovery, giving you 5k stamina over 25 seconds, and then of course giving the Major Brutality buff as well. Every 5 seconds, the Netch will also remove 1 negative effect from you, giving us a little bit of condition cancel on this build too. Now the armor buff is of course Ice Fortress, giving us that Major Resolve physical spell resist buff, and it gives us a little bit of minor protection as well. And then the ultimate on the back bar again is the Werewolf Ultimate Pack Leader. This isn't necessarily slotted so much because you want to go into werewolf mode, but for that passive, while slotted, your stamina recovery is increased by 15%. And of course, if you want to try the two-hand variant of this build, there's just a few changes to the front bar. You can switch out Dizzying Swing here if you like. You actually don't have to use Dizzy if you still want to use the birds. And then of course, you can use the Executioner Ultimate or even the AoE Morph in place of the Whirling Blades. Now, moving on to the champion points. Starting off in the tower tree, Dragoo's got 72 in the Warlord, favoring the reduced cost on Break Free pretty much over anything else when it comes to the sustain side here. So yeah, big focus there. And then in the Lover tree, Dragoo's got 75 Mooncalf, 32 Arcanist, 11 in Tenacity, and a whopping 3 in Health Recovery. He didn't actually have these points here, but he did have them mixed between these trees here. These are just kind of 3 leftover points so that we get access to that Wind Running passive. Stamina Recovery being the most important sustain stat for this build, and then of course Magicka Recovery is going to be great for that healing power too, and a little bit in Tenacity. Now moving on to the Shadow Tree, Dragoo's got 66 in Tumbling and only 11 in Shadow Ward. Big focus on Tumbling here to reduce the cost of Roll Dodge. Being in medium armor will reduce it even further, so a big focus on rolling on this build. And then finally, the block cost reduction, always important regardless of what build you're going to play. And we've got Sword and Board on the back bar too. Now moving on to the Apprentice, we've got 19 in Blessed, just for a little bit additional healing power on this spec. And then in the Atronach tree, Dragoo's got 81 in Mastered Arms, 19 Physical Weapon Expert, and 20 in Shattering Blows. The important passive, of course, being that Tactician passive, Roll Dodge to set an opponent off balance when you dodge an attack. And also, Dragoo put a few points in Shattering Blows, just favoring the additional damage against a shielded opponent, as that is very common in PvP. And then in the Ritual tree, we've got an even spread, 43, 44, and 44. The high crit rate on the dual wield build allows for the even spread to be the better option. If you go for the two-handed variant, you can consider taking a little bit of precise strikes out and investing more into piercing and mighty. Now the important passives here, of course, is the perfect strike for a little bit additional weapon crit. Exploiter for that 10% additional damage against an off-balance opponent, very important. And then Last Stand, always fantastic for that additional ultimate generation when you fall below 20% health. Now, moving on to the red tree, Dragoo's got 72 in Ironclad and then 56 in Resistant, and that's all he's got in this tree here. Very big focus on reducing incoming direct damage, i.e. enemy burst, and of course, critical damage. And then moving on to the Lady Tree, he's got 43, 43, and 37, dumping a whole bunch of points here to get access to that Unchained passive for sure, and just a nice even spread here to reduce all sources of incoming damage. Now moving on to the Lord Tree, he's got a whopping 19 in Quick Recovery for a little bit more healing power, and that is the build, guys. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into that PvP commentary. Of course, Dragoo has provided us with all of this gameplay. If you guys want to see more of Dragoo in action on this build or more from him, again, be sure to check out his YouTube channel, a link down in the description below for you guys. And as you guys can see, Dragoo has got a small group of friends here, and they are trying to tear through this huge group of red in the Imperial City, dropping some good burst on them already, and now they're just kind of playing with them at the door here. They throw their heals down, go in for that big combo alt dump, a ton of red players going down there. Dragoo goes for the AoE execute as well, finishing a few players off, getting one red player as he comes back through the door there. And it looks like a ton of red on the ground. A lot of the red also backing away from the doorway here. And Dragoo and his friends push out a little bit. Dragoo actually gets pulled out by the Dragonites pulled there. But the red group is just kind of collecting on the outside here. And Dragoo takes a super unfortunate pull from the chain here. And he actually sped this part of the footage up. But I wanted to show it because it shows him using his shuffle and then a cycle between his different heals in order to stay alive. And that's exactly what you want to do on this build. A great quick reaction into his mobility and heals, and he manages to get back down here with this group and dump a huge ultimate on the front end of this red group here. There you see a 13k Dawnbreaker crit on this build, and Dragoo's just going to keep pushing into these guys. The red group just completely in dismay here, and they just come back over the bodies just to make sure nobody's getting any reses, and that's it. They clean up that fight. An incredible 3vx there. Now moving on to the next one, they've got a lot of blue players in this corridor here. Dragoo's just throwing down the AoE heat while his friendly players push in. And look at that, more and more blue coming around the corner there. Dragoo's just going to regroup with his friends here. They're going to prepare themselves, go for, I think, a synchronized push into these guys. And the blues start to trickle in one at a time. And they just kind of hold their ground here. Now they push into the back of the blue group here. And the friendly players dumping their ultimate. Dragoo manages to get his Dawnbreaker on the back of the group. Of course, keeping that AoE hit point based heal going. It's going to stun everybody around him too if it hits them enough. And just keep him healthy here as he pushes in. And so much AoE pressure on this build. They managed to just bring more of the blue players down. And Dragoo taking a bit of pressure from that enemy Necromancer there himself, just cycling his heals, able to kind of shrug it off and just keep the pressure down on the rest of these players. And I think we really see the strength of this build shine when it's paired with something similar to it. They've got a few builds here with a lot of AoE pressure, the Necromancer, and I believe a friendly Warden here as well. And they're just able to put out so much heat into these enemy players and just wipe these groups as long as they can get these big bursts. And here we go. Dragoo's pushing out into this blue group again. And his friendly players up here just cleaning up the blue players that are trickling in. Dragoo just going for that combo. He'll throw the birds down, get the Subterranean Assault, and then right away go for that execute. Dotting that guy up, hitting him with the Subterranean to finish him off. And the blue players here kind of just pretty unorganized here. They've lost quite a few players already, and the rest of the players, they're just backing up. Oh man, they don't know where to go. They're sitting right in the big AoE damage that Dragoo throws down there. He just launches a big AoE combo with his Dawnbreaker, and there we see the birds to poke that guy and finish him off. It looks like one last player there. Dragoo goes for the Subterranean into the birds, and there's the execute to bring him down as well. And now moving on to the next fight here, right away, Dragoo opening up with a burst on the blue group as they come around the corner. Keeping the pressure up with those AoEs, managing to bring two blue players down there, and now the rest of Dragoo's group is pushing in here, followed by some more blue players, and Dragoo's just keeping the heat down, just rotating his different AoEs, now just going for that defensive cycle, rebuffing and throwing his heals over time down, and there's a huge Dawnbreaker on these guys. And he manages to get everybody with the stun. The enemy players here throwing a lot of healing power, though, to stay alive. But Dragoo and his friendly players just putting so much pressure here. Dragoo just running his stamina tank dry, throwing all that damage down. And these poor blue players, man, they come out to try again, and it's a trap. Look at this huge AoE alt dump. Every single blue that gets caught in that gets crushed, except for this last guy here, but he does not manage to sneak out the back. And Dragoo just taking the counter stun there, just heading back towards his friendly players. It looks like actually a lot of blue players still alive in this fight. I thought they had killed almost all of them, but more and more showing up. Dragoo quickly following up with another Dawnbreaker, just building so much ultimate thanks to getting a lot of kills with that first initial burst. And now it just looks like the last guy there, and wow, they wiped the entire group just like that. And here we go, a huge jump on top of the red group there. And the friendly player throwing down his Necro ultimate too. Just a little show of the AoE power of this build. Again, Dragoo is finding himself getting charged by a ton of red players. They're actually going for the alt dump too, but Dragoo had his heals up there, managing to survive it. And then going for the counter Dawnbreaker, and the friendly players throwing their ults down as well. And Dragoo just goes out the back end here, throwing his heals down too. He's got that Magicka-based heal, thank God, when he's low on stamina. And another big smack from Dragoo and his group here. The red players have just killed the boss, and a big AoE burst with the Dawnbreaker into the spin to win. The friendly Necromancer also throwing down the Colossus there, and so much damage. Everybody just kind of going down in that stack there. And moving on to the next fight here, Dragoo has found himself fighting a whole bunch of red players at the top of the Imperial City here. Huge AoE burst right away. The rest of his players also coming in with the pressure. And Dragoo just managing to kill a few of the red players there, finding himself a little lower on stamina. He quickly burns his Magicka using his rebuff and his mag-based heal, giving him that torque buff too. And the red group has now regrouped, and they're going to be pushing into Dragoo and his friends here. And Dragoo just throwing the heals down for himself and for his allies as well, able to heal his friends with that Mushroom Spore heal. And here we go. They're going to go for another push into the red players here. A nice big AoE dump again, bringing down a few of the red players, but still quite a few left standing. The reds are going to respond with their own AoEs. The negate goes down, and Dragoo's just pushing into the back end of the red group. And then he weaves back through here to help his friends put the damage into the remaining red players. These guys just doing their best to tank out the damage. That guy holding still. Oh no. Even if you're on a bulky build, you got to do your best to stay mobile in Cyrodiil. And now Dragoo is just going to keep putting the damage into the rest of the red players here, finishing off the last few stragglers. Again, I want to say a massive thank you and a massive shout out to Dragoo for sending this build in to be featured on the channel. Of course, check out Dragoo's YouTube channel and his Twitch down in the description below. He is a very talented PvP player, and he plays everything. So if you guys want to see not just Warden builds, but other builds and footage from him, be sure to check him out. Of course, we have a little bit of footage of the 2H variant of this build. As we kind of say our goodbyes here, if you guys want to send in your own build to be featured on the channel, or if you guys want to send in a clip for the top 5, you can send it to KristoferESO@hotmail.com. Give me a follow on Twitter if you guys want to keep up to date with my shenanigans. If you want to catch a live stream for that gameplay, or if you guys just want to come and hang out and talk, you can check me out on Twitch. Check out my website, KristoferESO.com, for written guides to all of my builds, as well as a hub for all of my ESO content. And of course, we are sponsored by What the Fast. They're a VPN for gamers. They can give you better ping to your favorite games, and they are free to try for the first month via the link down in the description below. And last but certainly not least, a huge thank you and a massive shout out to all of my patrons on Patreon. Without you guys, I couldn't do this job, so thank you guys so much for supporting. Thank you everybody just for tuning in and watching today. As always, I hope that everyone enjoyed. I'll see you next time, and have a great night, everyone.